Hey everybody, it is John Idarola for the Young Turks, and I want to come with a live video to talk about something that, now that we are a week on, we can actually speak about with some certainty. Um, what is going on is you still have, when you look at editorials and conversations on mainstream media, there's this debate about whether there was actually the wave that was hypothesized in the midterm elections. We're a week out from that now, and there's only a couple of races that still need to be called. There's some House races, there's a few Senate races, a governorship, but we have a much better idea than we did 4 or 5 days ago about what the actual results of the election were. And what I have noticed is that if you listen to Donald Trump or some of his defenders on the right, they're obviously denying that this was in any way a strike back against the president, that the left has any kind of a mandate to actually legislate from now that the election is passed. So you have that on the right, the denial that there was a wave, and we understand why. Obviously, it's about a narrative. You also have some centrists denying that there was a wave, like Brett Stevens and things like that. They apparently wrote their editorial about the election before the election happened and decided, they couldn't be bothered to actually change it. And so they are saying there was no wave, and that is why the left now needs to be bipartisan and work with the right to craft legislation. Don't get excited about your results. It wasn't that great, and here's why you need to work with the Republicans. So that is going on, and that is why a video like this is needed. It's like Apple TV or something like that in the background. Now, why is there a debate? We've got the actual numbers, so why are we having a debate back and forth? Well, here's why I think we are. To some extent, those of us who were covering the election the night of, things didn't look like they were going so amazingly. And I think for a lot of people, their evaluation of the election got locked in around 7 p.m. local time and hasn't actually been updated based on what has happened since election day. As many races have been called and more information has come in, a lot of people had their mind made up and haven't changed it since then. But we've got the actual data, and that is what in this video we're going to go over. So I'm not interested in the narratives either from the right or the center or whatever. I'm interested in the actual numbers of what happened. And so consider this your definitive video on this topic. Was there actually a wave? Well, first of all, we still have a few races in the House that need to be called, but based on the way things are looking, it looks like the Democrats are going to get in the high 30s, possibly 40 seats. Now, this would be slightly above the estimates going into election night, and is, I think, objectively big. I mean, this is more House seats than the Democrats have gotten in one election in something like 40 to 50 years. So, historically, for the Democratic Party, it is big. And in terms of recent wave elections, whether on the left or on the right, whether it's the Democrats or the Republicans, this is comparable to those other wave elections. And it goes along with a popular vote margin of about 7.5% that is right there in the middle of other elections that we have definitively called waves over the past decade or two. So when it comes to the actual results in the House, they were a little bit better than the polls said they were, and they are a strong repudiation of the Republican Party, both in terms of the houses that were the seats that were flipped and the percentage vote that the Democrats won them by. And understand that this is at a time when we had 3.7% unemployment and heavily gerrymandered seats, as well as voter suppression. So especially considering those, but even if you put those things aside, in the House, which was the biggest, result of the election, this is obviously wave territory. We have not been, we haven't had a similar sort of thing in the past. I mean, recently that is the range that we've been in. Now, in terms of how those seats were flipped, I'm also interested in the change. The districts that flipped moved on average 21 points to the Democrats. That is obviously big, when you're looking at an entirety of the country. The average district everywhere moved 10 points to the left. So that's including seats that didn't flip at all, including the reddest seats in the country. On average, everywhere moved 10 points, which is obviously big. To have that happen in just 2 years, by the way. Overall, 317 districts moved to the left. And again, all of this happened during a time when the economy is, in the view of the media and I think a lot of people, doing well. I don't actually think the media that the economy is doing well, but that's the perception, and certainly the perception on the right. Even so, 317, the vast majority of the districts did move to the left. So in terms of House seats, in terms of the percentage popular vote, and the overall motion, this is very strong as a repudiation against Donald Trump, whether he chooses to accept it or not. Now, while gaining control of the House is huge, both in terms of being able to stop Donald Trump, being able to actually pass good legislation, at least in the House, whether it actually gets signed or not, that's like the single biggest thing that happened in this election. That is not the only good area. And I think it's, for some reason, the only one that's really being talked about. But in terms of governorships, the Democrats have gained at least 7. It is possible at this point that they could gain 8 or 9, but 7 is absolutely gigantic. And they did it all across the country. If you actually look at the map of the states that were flipped for the governor's seats, it is from the West Coast to the East Coast. They did it all over the place. We don't talk too much about what governors can accomplish, but in terms of passing legislation, changing things at the state level, and also blocking, horrible legislation that might come out of Republican state legislatures, these changes are gigantic. Think about all the places in the country that didn't have expanded access to healthcare after the ACA was passed because of Republican governors. So that is big. And it means, by the way, that for the first time in a very long time, the majority of the country is going to wake up in a state that is governed at the gubernatorial level by the Democrats. Getting that many in one election is gigantic and very important for how elections will be run in future cycles. If you're looking at Georgia, Arizona, and Florida right now, a lot of the uncertainty and craziness is because of Republican governors. So that's House and governorships. The Senate. So here's the thing that the Republicans will turn to. They will say, well, look, Democrats didn't do well in the Senate elections, and that should be worrying for them. So look, I think we could have done better. We could have won Texas, hypothetically. It was always going to be very difficult, but it could have happened. We could have had much better candidates in Indiana and Tennessee, hypothetically in North Dakota, although that was going to be a hard bet in any case. And so what did we end up actually losing? Well, we lost generally the races where we had shitty candidates. Pardon my French, but we had bad candidates that didn't fit in with the message of the Democratic Party at large. They were running ads that were effectively indistinguishable from Republican ads in the last days. And so consider that. We lost those, and overall, how many seats will we end up losing net? Well, it depends to some extent. It looks like Nevada is now, that's determined. The Democrat actually won. We're not sure totally about Florida, but let's assume the Republicans do take Florida because he is ahead in the election. That means that they will probably have gained 2 net seats in this election, the Republican Party. They're doing that, again, at a time of record low unemployment and a map that is more beneficial for the Republican Party than any map that we have had or will have for a span of about a decade. The Democrats were defending far, far more Senate seats than the Republicans were, and they were even doing, I think there were 10 in states that Trump actually won. So think about that. At a time when they have seemingly good economic numbers, when they have a map that favors them more than they can hope for in the next at least 3 Senate elections, and they have a number of senators that they can try to pick off from the Democratic Party in states that Trump just won 2 years ago, even then, doomsday, the perfect storm, they pick up 2 seats. Picking up 2 seats is good for them. That's great. If I were a Republican, I would feel great about that. It makes it a little bit harder for the Democrats to take the Senate the next time around. But that was the best case scenario for them, and they gained 2. It will not be like that in the future. In 2 years, the map is better for the Democrats. In 4 years, it's even better for the Democrats. And so, assuming we get our stuff together, we have productive primaries, and we put forward the right sorts of progressive candidates, we are very well primed to take control of the Senate just in time for a real progressive president to actually start passing legislation. So, House and governorships, both great for the Democrats. Senate, which is the worst for the Democrats, really not that bad. And certainly not, you could have easily had 4 or 5 seats end up flipping net overall, and we didn't have that. But beyond that, let's talk about the areas that aren't really getting talked about really at all. So, state legislature races. I understand we don't talk about them too much. There's so many of them. There's literally thousands going on at any given time. But do you know that the Democrats flipped almost 400 state legislature seats? So we talk about how the mismanagement of the party, the mismanagement and misallocation of the resources resulted in about 1,000 seats lost over the course of multiple elections. Well, we just got back almost 400 of them in one cycle. And again, that's when groups like Justice Democrats and Our Revolution and other groups like that are just getting on their feet. Imagine, with 2 more years of funding and organization and volunteers and all of that, putting forward more candidates in more of these races around the country, that 400 is going to be potentially even eclipsed in future elections. So I know that we don't talk about it. If it's not happening in your state, you're probably not thinking about it too much. But that is huge to get that many seats. But that's abstract. Let's talk about specifically how did that actually work? What can we expect out of state legislatures? So, Democrats gained trifectas, that's gaining the governorship and both houses of the legislature in 6 states in one cycle in Colorado, Illinois, Maine, Nevada, New Mexico, and New York. So that means that they have gained effectively supreme power. We'll see what they do with it. That's something that we have to watch for. But that is absolutely huge in a number of different states, including some states that still get referred to as swing states, by the way. Nevada is still considered a swing state. It is now heavily Democratic. So, in addition, they took away Republican trifectas in 4 additional states. That's 3 by winning the governorship in Kansas, Michigan, and Wisconsin, and 1 by taking both chambers of the New Hampshire legislature in just one election. So that's 6 states that now have a Democratic mandate to govern. It's 4 additional states where the Republican ability to govern has been severely hampered. They also flipped the Maine Senate, the Minnesota House, won supermajorities in the Oregon House and Senate. And to put it in perspective, so while all of that's going on for the Democrats, what did the Republicans accomplish in terms of state legislative races? They flipped the Alaskan House to Republican. That's the only one in the entire country that they flipped in this election. So again, I understand nobody has time to go through all of these. I've got way too much time on my hands. Nobody can actually go through all of these, and we don't even know for sure the exact numbers. It's close to 400. We'll see how close in the end. But that is huge, and how is that not getting talked about when people are saying whether there was a wave or not? Yes, we focus on the House, we focus on the Senate, the governor's races, the national margin, all of that, but all over these legislatures are flipping back to Democrats, or in some cases, yeah, Dan, I agree Alaska is important. I don't want them to take control of any of these. I'm just trying to put it in perspective and to give them credit where they deserve it. So that's legislatures. But in addition, we have the ballot measures. In Washington state, there was a strong gun safety measure. Michigan voters legalized recreational marijuana. Medical marijuana was approved in Missouri, Oklahoma, and Utah. It's just like commonplace now that marijuana will be legalized in multiple states in every election. We barely even talk about it anymore. It's just sort of expected. In Missouri and Arkansas, they passed increases to the minimum wage, showing that, again, in some of these states, especially ones that are not considered super left states, there is very much an appetite for that sort of legislation. And as a related note, I apologize if there's tangents. Bernie Sanders says on day one of the new sort of class, he's going to put forward his $15 an hour minimum wage bill once again. So he is going to be attempting to set the agenda right off the bat. And here at TYT, we're going to be helping with that. Now, I want to step back from these particular things. No, I'm not ignoring Medicaid and Medicare. There were so many of these awesome bills. In one state, I believe it was Nevada, they approved a significant increase in the amount of renewable energy that would be required. There was automatic voter registration and expansions of voting rights in a number of states. I could honestly my voice is going out because of all of these results that I'm collecting here. There were a lot of good ballot measures all over the place in terms of housing for the homeless, things like that. So not just in the elections, but in the ballot measures as well, very good results. Now, what about the voters themselves? Turnout was obviously very high. This was the highest turnout midterm election in something like a century. So if an election was going to be able to be said to be a wave, not just in the electoral results, but in how representative of the will of the people it is, this was the biggest one because more people actually voted. And while voter turnout moved up in a lot of different groups, the highest increase was among young voters, who, by the way, are overwhelmingly voting for Democrats now. Democrats did better amongst both men and women, but especially women. Turnout was up in all of these different groups. And understand that this was going on at a time when more candidates were rejecting corporate PAC money and corporate money generally. It was a time when the candidates that were being put forward were more representative along a number of different axes than ever before. And so again, if you're going to have a wave, you want it to be an election where more people are actually voting, and you want it to be an election where the people they're voting for are actually representative, both politically and in terms of these different demographic groups. So those are the numbers. If we were to look at those numbers and say, no, there wasn't a wave, I don't know what that would actually mean. The data just doesn't support that idea. Now, you could say this wasn't a wave, and the past 3 or 4 times we said it was a wave, it wasn't a wave. That's consistent if you want to say that. But by the measures that we have used historically for multiple decades, this was very much a wave election. From the top to the bottom, from elected offices to ballot initiatives, from the percentage that they won by to the sort of, coalition that they put together to win. I understand people have different like narratives they want to put forward, and I also understand that, and I'm the perfect example of this. Some leftists on election night were like, "Oh God, this stuff isn't going well," and man, I really thought this was going to be better, and some people locked that in. But when you actually look at the numbers, when you take stock after multiple days of putting together all this, things are really good and probably going to get better because there are a number of House races that haven't been called yet that will go to the Democrats. And so that potentially puts them up into the 40 range, possibly farther than 40. I'm seeing people yelling breaking news. I don't know if they're being serious or if they're just making it up. But anyway, those are the numbers. And so in the future, if you see Donald Trump saying that there was no wave, he doesn't have to work with the Democrats. If you see, Fox and Friends say, Republicans, don't worry, you don't need to worry about anything, we're doing just fine, the numbers just don't support it. And if you ever read, a Brett Stevens editorial, which I don't know why you would do, no, this is not proof that we need to work with the Republicans. You might want them to work with the Republicans, but this is not evidence of it. So anyway, yeah, that's all I have to say about that. Thank you, everybody who's been watching this video. I know this was a really long one, but there was so much to go through. If you appreciate this sort of data-driven response to the news, feel free to become a TYT member. You can do that at tyt.com/John. It's a great place. You go, there's a little button, $4.99. You can become a member. It's basically nothing. It's like a latte, except you get access to effectively progressive Netflix, 18 different shows, behind-the-scenes content, the daily post-game show, special features, and things like that. No, let me say, this is sort of off the record, I guess, but for the rest of this year, we're going to have a series of members-exclusive, in-depth, multi-hour shows breaking down different aspects of what's been going on and where we go from here. That is going to be for members, so you can get access to that by going to tyt.com/John. Also follow me on Twitter at John Idarola. Okay, thank you, everybody. I'll see you in the next one.